So looking back on your career, what would you have done differently, if anything?
I think the one thing I always think of, I wish I had studied a bit more.
Hey, I'm Nate Cadillac, and it's just me during this interview today with Cole. And we had really a great conversation. You know, what I loved about Cole's background is how he's been thinking about games forever since, you know, he started creating and working on GUBS in the fourth grade, and how that journey took him to coming out with the Stardew Valley board game, working with Concerned Ape. I mean, what a career so far, and I'm really excited for you to check out the episode. So on to the pod. Today, I'm excited to speak with Cole Medeiros, the co-designer of Stardew Valley, the board game. Cole is a game designer and has successfully created two well-known and highly praised board games, Web of Spies and GUBS, a game of wit and luck, with the latter selling over 100,000 copies worldwide. Aside from board games, he has worked in creative and design roles in game companies like Jam City, Zynga, and Storm 8. Stardew Valley is a cooperative game where players work together to restore the valley. They accomplish this by growing crops, raising animals, expanding their farm, and collecting resources from across the valley. And it has sold over 30 million games in total as of this year. Cole, I'm so excited to chat with you. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, absolutely.
So normally we kick things off with, what is your favorite game to play?
Yeah, normally I have trouble answering that question because I'm racking my brain and trying to think, oh, my favorite game. So I tend to focus on just what is the game that I'm playing at the moment and really thinking a lot about. Currently, it's a board game called League of Dungeoneers. I'm blanking on the designer of it because it was a Kickstarter. It's like a giant box filled with cards, and it's sort of like a child or inspired by like Warhammer Quest. So it's like a dungeon crawler. You can play cooperatively, you can play by yourself, and it fills up your table with random dungeons and fun stuff like that. So that's the game I'm always thinking like, oh, I want to play a little bit more of that when I find the time.
Love it. Yeah, you know, it kind of maybe leads me into starting this conversation around, you know, what makes a great board game? Like, what, you know, we've chatted with a lot of great video game designers and digital games in general, but like board games just kind of carry this extra weight, the physical nature of it, you know, the amount of risk that's involved in creating a board game, I suppose, you know, financially speaking. What makes a great board game? I'll start there.
You know, it's such a difficult question to answer because, you know, is a game good or not? I think so much of that has to do with the intention of the game and also the audience for the game. You know, certain games that I love, other people are like, oh, it's too much luck. You know, and games they love, I'm like, oh, it's too stagnant, you know. So I feel like so much of it has to do with, does it meet expectations? And I think, you know, I can pretty clearly, I think, point to where some games that I've played like fall down. Of course, nothing pops to mind, but you know, when I'm in playing the game, I can think like, oh, this is the place where like it's maybe a little bit too clunky for what it's trying to do, or the fun is blocked by these other elements that are kind of dragging it down. So I really think, you know, a great board game, sort of like a great movie or story, you kind of say, hey, there's nothing here that doesn't need to be here. You know, like everything here has a purpose and a reason, and really kind of complements, you know, whatever that sensation is that I'm trying to.
Yeah, it does kind of remind me of like picking up a book, you know, like if you don't deliver on the promise of the title, or like an email that you get is clickbait, right? You know, and it doesn't deliver on the subject line, like you're always let down. Yes. So I can see how that comes into play. Do you feel like, you know, designing games for children or adults is more difficult, or like what do you prefer, and do you think about it differently? Like, do you treat the audiences differently?
Yeah, I've thought about this a lot because I feel sort of like I end up as the board or card game like DJ. Like I'm the one saying, okay, I'm going to this game group. Which games am I bringing for this particular group? What's going to resonate and actually, you know, I want to have fun with these people. So what are they going to like? And I've seen it happen, where you bring a game that you're like, oh yeah, I really enjoy this game, but this group, it just doesn't land with them because it's got too much complexity or maybe not enough choice. And I've been thinking about that with regards to, I have a couple of little kids and my oldest is 6. And so I'm like, ooh, I want to share these games with her, but, making sure it's not too much or too complicated and really appeals to like these very simple things that are actually a lot of fun, versus the heavier, chunkier games that I like to play with my, advanced gaming friends who just kind of have a library to work from in their minds and they can just take on these really complicated, mechanics. It's very different.
Yeah, absolutely. I do like the being able to take kind of a complex thing though and break it down for kids. So we had an interview with Jeff Chen, who created this game called Squeezy, and he's a crossword like he submitted crossword puzzles to the New York Times. He's been published quite a bit, and being able to sit down at the dinner table and build a crossword puzzle with his daughter, is to me is like, oh my, that's like the pinnacle of creativity and gamesmanship. And like just that idea alone is so cool. And, just taking something kind of complex and breaking it down. I assume that it's difficult, but so rewarding, when you can build something that's really tuned in to a certain audience.
Yes. I mean, I had an experience where I took a game, I think it was a recent Kickstarter. It was called Botany. And a really beautiful game about like collecting flowers and like sort of Victorian era. And I was showing my daughter, and the rules of the game are beyond her at this point. Like it's a little bit too complicated, all the card play. But I said, hey, what if we just take out these flowers and we're just traveling around the world trying to collect the flowers? And it was just, so I sort of simplified it. And she had so much fun just moving her pawn around. We weren't even really counting spaces. Sometimes for children, things that we have already like kind of rolled past in terms of, we want more challenge as we're adults. Kids are like so excited to just draw a card and like read it and try to find it on the board. And so it's like, I think it's all about finding the level at which, anybody who's playing, it's a little bit of challenge, but it's also accessible to them.
In the board game space, how do you know which idea to chase? I know I think it's GUBS, you had this idea like percolating in the 4th grade, I believe, right?
Yeah. Really
and so you're really sitting on that for a while. And, the part of that is you've built up, so much thoughtfulness and like the ideas that surrounded that particular game. It was probably inevitable that it was going to come to market. But yet, like I don't know, like how do you choose which things to chase?
That's a really good question. I chat with a couple of my friends who are also working on a lot of different projects, including games, and we often feel like the idea phase is really easy. It's like, ooh, we're kind of bursting with all these things that we're interested in or excited about, and then you have to, at some point, latch onto something and say, I want to spend the next couple of years, working on this thing, and it's that exciting to me. And it's really hard to do because it's like you're signing up for this commitment, and but I feel like the best games, or probably the best, artistic projects in general, come from when you can't stop thinking about it, and your heart just keeps coming back to it, and you're like, ooh, I want this kind of an experience, and I can't find it out there. So how do I build that? And you just get a little bit obsessed. That's the way I sort of describe it.
So with GUBS, where did that idea come from? And I mean, you were so young. Like, did you know that games were a thing that you could design and build? Like that was, how you watch movies when you're a kid, sometimes you just don't know everything that goes into it. Sometimes you just don't even know what's possible, or like, I could be a director or an actor, like it's complete, it's done, right? With games, like, were you around them? Like, did your parents, were they involved in this? Like, where did this all start?
Yeah, I feel like I remember, we had a closet with some board games in there, and I always saw my parents playing games like Risk with their friends, or things like that. And I remember when I was very young, I saw a copy of Hero Quest, and I was like, "What is this?" Like I can bring it on my table, and there's little adventures, and there's like furniture, and I didn't know it at the time, but I was infatuated with games, and still today am, because I think of them as story machines. Like they create an experience, and that experience is something I share with other people, and then those people are like, we can talk about it. Like, we don't say things like, "Oh, remember that time, your little pawn did something." It's like, no, remember you did the thing. You fought the robot or whatever, and it becomes kind of this really meaningful part of your history, I guess. And so, as a very little kid, I was drawing these figures. I called them GUBS, and they kind of built out this world, just sketching and doodling and having fun with it. And then I remember sitting down and thinking, I could cut up some index cards and draw some pictures and figure out how these things interact and kind of make like this little story that you're trying to play through. And just through massive amounts of iteration and playing this with people and saying, "Hey, look at this cool thing we made," and they would, add to it over time, it became this thing that was really precious to us.
Yeah, that's wild. So when you're user testing a game, essentially, like what is different about testing a board game versus testing a video game? Is there a difference in your mind, or how do you approach getting feedback and knowing it's working?
Yeah, yeah. With the board and card game stuff, usually it feels a lot slower to me because it's analog. You have to get people to the table. Um, with some digital things like Tabletop Simulator, you can do this remotely, but it's always better when you're talking about a physical product to see people holding the cards, moving the stuff around, and just seeing how, like, I'm always watching for what are they forgetting, because with the analog experience, people have to kind of run the game. They have to process the rules and then make it work. Versus a video game, it's kind of doing a whole bunch of stuff for you. And so I feel like with a video game, it's hard to know, are people getting the right feedback so they're aware of exactly how their choices are changing the status of things. And in a board game, it's more like, oh well, I did this thing, and now I have to move that pawn. So the input and feedback, as long as they're following the rules, they've done that part, is a little bit more, I don't know, direct. But there's still a lot of overlap in what you watch for, I think, when you're seeing if a game is communicating to the player.
Yeah. So I've done a bunch of user testing on mobile apps and things like that, where you're kind of kind of looking over the shoulder of someone, essentially. Are you kind of like, "Hey, take this game, let me know what you think," or do you ever do like live user testing with like board games? I mean, how does that actually play out?
Mostly live, because I feel like I need to be there and see what they're seeing, kind of observe. Um, Depending on where it is in development, a lot of times towards the end of that process, like I don't really answer any questions. If people are like, "Hey, how does this work?" I'm like, they don't know how that works. Write it down, and then because for me, I don't want the mechanics of the game to get in between the player and the experience, and so if they're forgetting something or getting stuck on something or not quite understanding how something works, even after they've been playing a few turns, I feel like that's a good indicator that something could be more elegant.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, you released GUBS. Was that 2002, I believe, ish?
And yeah, I was still in college or right after college, so it would have been very early 2000s.
Was there anything in between GUBS and Web of Spies?
Not anything officially published. There's always like a lot of prototypes kind of cooking.
Yeah.
Just I like to design and make stuff, and a lot of the things you make, you're like, this is not quite there yet. Or there was a game or two that people told me, "Hey, this is ready to go. You should do this." But I was like, it's not exactly what I want it to be yet, and so I'm not still working on it. But yeah, those are the only two official ones that I did on my own.
You were working at some of these companies in between and sort of building that experience. And what happened when Web of Spies, that idea came around? Were you looking for to build something on the side? Were you looking to escape kind of the 9-to-5? Like what was going on in your life at that time?
I think I remember, I just always had this concept of this very simple spy experience. And I just thought, how cool would it be? I remember thinking like flying around the world, picking up these assets, and the stories that could generate. And so I put a prototype together just really quickly, actually. And I tried it with my wife and then a good friend of mine, and we just went, wow, this kind of works, just right out of the gate. And my friend got really excited. He actually was a big helper along the process of, hey, you got to do this, or let's play it again. And I had wanted to try Kickstarter. It's funny, about a year or so before that, I made a space game, and I was all excited to make this space game. And then Zia, Legends of a Drift System, it dropped on Kickstarter, and everybody, it went nuts. And I went, oh, that space game kind of stole my thunder a little bit. But the game's cool, so I'm happy with my pick as well. But yeah, so I kind of changed, and I had the spy idea, and then I realized also the idea of secret agents and spies really resonates with a lot of people, and that taught me there are certain concepts that you just tell to people, and they are like, ooh, yes, I want to do that, And it's interesting to think about theme as sort of an on-ramp into your whatever it is you're building.
So Kickstarter was, and especially early on, was such a great way to get distribution and attention. What was it like for GUBS when you released that? Like, obviously a successful game. What did you do anything specific to try to drive attention to it? Marketing is just such a hard thing for so many, creators.
Yes. I remember I borrowed a little bit of money from my parents to fund the original, I think we printed 1,000 decks, and then we were just selling them ourselves. I was going around to game stores, and the game stores would say, okay, we'll do it on consignment, maybe, you're a local. And then they would call me a week later and say, hey, I don't know why, but we sold them all. We'd like some more. And that kind of started picking up steam. Then we sold out after about a year or so, maybe a little bit longer, just kind of selling them myself. My parents were literally shipping some of these out of their garage. And then it was like, well, are we going to do a reprint? And I was like, well, I don't know. That was a lot of work, and of course I want to. But around that time is when GameRight reached out and said, hey, we came across your game. It looks like it'd be a good fit. What do you think? And that took a couple of years, and then, then the game was published by them and did pretty well with them for a while.
So it was a lot of word of mouth, it sounds like, early on. And which is the best kind. It's just the hardest kind.
It's really good, but it's true. Marketing is a really challenging thing. I don't really know the secret to it, other than I think its importance is underestimated, because you can have a great product and nobody hears about it, and it doesn't go anywhere, and you can have like a mediocre game that just has the right marketing and just everybody knows about it, so it's successful. So it's really tricky.
Do you have any advice around that? So we've talked with a lot of indie developers who just struggle with getting traction. I think with your current position, you had a built-in audience with a successful video game, and so it's much easier, obviously, to launch something new there. But I don't know, just in your experience, do you have any tips for game creators who are thinking about releasing a game, building a game, and just trying to get some eyeballs on it?
I think one thing that worked in my favor with the Kickstarter was really trying to make it clear to people. I don't know if this is still something that would work on Kickstarter, but I was like, hey, it's just me. Like I'm just an individual. And I tried my best to communicate what was I doing, why was I doing it, here's the production, here's the ongoing stuff. And I don't know, I just think it resonates really with folks. Like if you're just in your living room chopping up stuff and mailing it out, like people are like, wow, that's really kind of neat. That's not a big company that I'm kind of bored with that story. It's just a small little one person or a group of people just doing something because they're very passionate about it. And I think there's some overlap there too with my current work with Concerned Ape and Stardew Valley, where as the story goes, he just kind of sat down and made the game and then continued to work on it himself. And it's very small, and there's a lot of heart that goes into it. So I think that takes time to communicate, but I think that's a very authentic, genuine story that if you walk down that path as you're designing and you're trying to promote whatever it is, if you can share why you love it, then other people, may also see that and also love it.
Yeah, it's a little counterintuitive to inject your own personality into it, but I do think like Kickstarter did a great job of almost like facilitating that message, so that you kind of had to do that. Like you had to create a video talking about the product that you were selling or raising money for. And I watched your video. I thought it was great. I thought it came across kind of like exactly how you probably wanted it to be portrayed. And I'm just a single, it's just me here, and here's kind of what I'm doing, and showing a little bit of the behind the scenes. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. That's such great advice.
Also my friend, Are you talking about the Web of Spies?
Web of Spies Kickstarter. Yep.
My friend, so I was having some trouble recording that initially because I was just all stuffy and like trying to explain this thing, and I just couldn't really do a very good job of it. And then my friend, he said, hey, come on down. I do a lot of video stuff. We're going to do this. And then he's like, forget about the camera. I'm going to set up over here. I'm just going to talk to you. And I want you just to tell me, why are you excited about this? Like, what is it that's so cool? And we just talked, and what he got out of me was the authentic, like, this is why I'm excited about this project. And it wasn't like, here's why you should back it, or here's why the game. It wasn't really about the game so much. It's like the game is cool, but the project is also, it's me. So if you want to help me make this thing, so I don't know. There might be something to that. Just if you're enlisting help, like show who you really are and what it is you want to do, and then people will say, "Oh, that seems kind of neat. I'd like to help this guy."
Yeah, I think that's spot on. So tell me a little bit about the backstory of Concerned Ape and creating Stardew Valley, the board game. Like how did that come to be? How did you get in touch and like become the right person to launch the board game?
Yeah, it was kind of interesting because we had a mutual friend who was talking to Concerned Ape and saying, hey, would you ever maybe think of making a board game for Stardew? And I think he said, oh, that sounds kind of interesting, but I don't know, how to proceed with that, and I'm very busy. And so my friend was thinking about me at the time. He knew I was doing a lot of board games and card games, so he introduced us on a on a multiplayer game of Stardew Valley, which I remember being really nervous because I'm like, I'm familiar with the game, but I was like, now I'm playing it with the creator while I'm trying to talk to him about this, trying not to.
Right. That is a next level like elevator pitch, like pitching a VC in an elevator. It's like playing a game while with the
I'm
creator,
in the elevator he built.
And pitching him. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right.
It's a nice elevator. But and I mean he's very mellow. He's a great guy, and but also I think I wasn't the first person to approach him with this idea, and he gets a lot of pitches for really interesting things, but because it's really just him and a very small team, we have to be very careful with what he takes on. He tries not to stretch himself too thin or get too distracted from the development of the video game. And so I said, well, let me kick around some ideas. We'll talk again in a month. If I have something that becomes interesting, we'll do it. And if not, no harm. And so we just kind of began a conversation that took about a year of like making progress, kind of presenting it to him. A couple months in, I have some things that's kind of sort of playable. And it was all over Tabletop Simulator, by the way, the whole development, because he was up in Seattle, and so we were testing the game on there. And about a year in, he said, wow, this feels like Stardew Valley to me. This is it. I think this is it. And so he said, okay, like, what do we got to do now?
Yeah,
and so
right.
we had a lot of art we needed to create. We had a lot of manufacturing and production we needed to figure out. And so I just kind of said, okay, let me, I know some of it, but I needed to learn a lot to figure that out. And it took about another year. And then we sort of just announced it, which was really fun, just to surprise everybody. Hey, there's a board game, and it's available right now.
That's kind of great. You spent a year developing this. I mean, were you being paid? Were you just kind of doing this on your own time, like trying to pitch like a year-long pitch, or what?
I wasn't being paid. I thought of it as just a really spectacular opportunity, and so I was working at the time, and then I would just come home and work on it in the evenings, or I would spend time on the weekends. And like my daughter had just been born, and so it was kind of like a very busy time. And it was a lot, but it was a lot of fun too, because I think because he's such an artist and he knows the technical side of things, he knows the visual side, the audio side, kind of the whole experience with how he built Stardew Valley. It was so easy to talk to him about what was working or not. Like he would just say, he's like, all this is good. That part though, there's something not quite right with that. And he was right. I would be kind of thinking the same thing. And so it was, the whole development process was, I think, as smooth and as iterative as it possibly could have been.
That's kind of a crazy story. I mean, that's really, you think about a lot of people who, there's a lot of controversy around like whether you should, especially when you're doing like spec work, like whether you should get paid for it, do stuff for free. I think Tracy Fullerton talked a little bit about, really just saying yes to everything, like especially early on in your career, and just trying to snag every opportunity you can get. But later on, you got to be a little bit more selective. You got a kid coming on, and like that's a kind of a risk, but it does sound like you have this theme running through all of your decisions that it feels very personal. Like it feels like you decide to work on the things that mean a lot to you. You don't know whether they're going to be successful or not. I don't know. Can you speak to how do you listen to your gut so confidently? Like what, where does that come from?
If something doesn't feel right, or here's a good one. If you're having trouble finding motivation to stick to something, it might be a good indicator that you're sticking to the wrong thing, or that you're missing some component. There's some piece about this that's like kind of holding you up. And I find like the things that I get really excited about, I try to clarify what I'm excited about, in that thing. If I know what it is, I'm like, oh, that's my goal. That's what I'm doing. That's why this is so neat to me. And I almost envision it at the end. I kept imagining when I was working on Stardew how cool it would be to hold the box in my hand and be like, wow, there it is. And I could kind of see it. And every time I did that, I was like, I would get kind of butterflies, be like, oh, that's going to be so cool. And then, versus other projects which pop up and seem kind of neat, but then like sort of fade away, or, maybe the time just isn't right for those things, or maybe they're not that exciting, or I think it's just really important I hear sometimes people thinking, well, I need to make this thing, or I need to do this, or it's got to have this because people like that, or whatever. And it's like, no, you got to follow, what is it that you really like to do? What are you really excited about? Because that's going to be a truer barometer to finding that like magic thing.
Yeah. Love that. There's I'm sure we all have our own creative process for designing, building, whatever. What's your process? Do you tend to like, I don't know, do you tend to sketch things out generally, or do you try to get right into the physical nature of board games? Like how do you go about creating a game?
My process always tends to start with like an emotion or like the sensation that I want, um, or just like for example, I've been trying to make for a long time a game that makes you feel like you're sitting in the captain's chair of like a Star Trek ship and going on adventures. And so I think, well, what is it about that I like so much? What's the feeling that I want? And it's this feeling of like discovery and camaraderie and like different challenges and not just conflict, but like exploration and diplomacy and these things. And so I kind of find the core of the idea, that experience, and then I start thinking, okay, what is the format and mechanics that support that best? Is this like more of an RPG thing where you're writing stuff down on paper? Is it cards? Is it board? Is it digital? And that's kind of like the starting point is that idea. Then it's like the mechanics, and then it very quickly goes into. I like to sketch it. I like to kind of take a piece of paper, sort of draw some of the components out. Just like there's going to be a board, there's going to be dice, and then I can start to visualize like what does it look like on the table, how many decks of cards are there to do what it is that I want to do. Then I try to build it as quickly as possible, but that's the process. That's usually the part I get caught in because I'll build a bunch of it, and then it's a bit of a slog even to get that initial prototype together. It can be challenging.
Do you think board games and just like VR technology, is there like a future there that you are curious about, or too early, not relevant? What's your take?
It's interesting because I do have an Oculus headset, and or the Quest, or I can't remember which one, but it's a lot of fun to get in there and jump into these virtual worlds, especially when I'm playing with my friends. But I've downloaded a couple that are sort of more board game-ish experiences, and I find them neat and fascinating, but I don't know. Personally, for me, there's something that I think I treasure about stepping away from the electronics and the screens, and the fact that I'm holding the physical card and putting it down on the table and rolling dice and moving pieces that like I just can't get that same feeling any other way than really being physically there.
Yeah, I agree. Especially like it's such an intimate thing, especially, playing virtually or versus friends in your living room. Right. And that's part of what I think makes board games so special is the community aspect. And I still play Catan, whatever you think of that, with buddies, we get together every few times a year and play that, and nothing beats it, like it's just, could really be any game, to be honest, but
that's the thing. That's kind of the magic, is that when you find a game that kind of works for you and your group, it's not really about the game. The game is just a facilitator of that conversation. You're sitting around talking about something, and it's unfolding in front of you based on your inputs, and there's just nothing better.
So looking back on your career, what would you have done differently, if anything?
I think the one thing I always think of, I wish I had studied a bit more math, like probability and economy design, things like that. Just because there's a lot of elements of game design that function around numbers or the chances for something to happen, and just having like a really sharp understanding of that, or how to build an economy. Like I would consider
Yeah.
myself more on the narrative side of design, and I know how to make a good mechanic, but like I worked with some really good economy designers, and I went, wow, this is a whole science of inputs and outputs and frequency, and it's really, if you want to make something complicated, you really do need to have a handle on that. And I think my mathematical background is a little bit weaker than I'd like it to be.
Same. Yeah. Yeah, it's important. Or at least it opens up different doors, or lets you think a little bit differently. What are some like resources if for people either wanting to strengthen their experience in game design, or just getting started? Do you have any books or videos or movies, that come to mind?
I tinkered around in Game Maker Studio for video game design, and I thought that was a lot of fun. Also, I feel like Unity has a lot of really good. I remember tutorials that I was walking through in the past. Board game wise, there was I'm blanking on all of the resources that I've read through. I feel like the best thing to do if you want to make games is really just to start extremely small and just start making games. Like for me, the hands-onness of it, and the fact that like with a deck of index cards and some pawns and dice, like I can make all kinds of crazy stuff. And then you build it, and if it's small, you should be able to build it quickly, and then you test it, and then you see that feedback right away of, are people interested in this? Are they making choices that they find interesting? And for me, that was always the best teacher, because I just was constantly doing that and seeing a lot of my ideas fail. But then you're like, oh, now I understand why that doesn't. It seems cool in my head, but it doesn't actually work that well.
I don't know if this is a thing. I'm sure there's courses that exist, but man, it would be cool to have someone like you teaching a course on how to make a really simple game, right? Starting with, like you said, some dice and cards or whatever. And, kind of like getting people to get their feet wet a little bit, would be really fun.
Yeah.
So if you ever
I would love to watch that.
Yeah. With all the time you have.
Yeah. I really like talking about game design. As far as, I never got formal teaching. I know there's courses now, like some folks, I went to UC Santa Cruz, and some folks say there's a game design program or class there. And it's real tricky, because I worked with a lot of people who said, oh, I know how to make a great game. And I just kind of went like, I don't know. Like I know the process that eventually yields something that is fun, or discards stuff that is not fun. But I would even hesitate to say, oh, I know I can just sit down and make a great game, because it's such a tremendous thing. But through tiny little steps, you can find stuff that's fun and cool, and kind of just like follow that thread. And it's really kind of a detective game.
That's great. Well, I know you're working on Stardew Valley right now. Is that just a kind of like a full-time job for you? What does your day-to-day look like?
Yes, I am an employee of Concerned Ape, and my job is mostly like business and logistics. So I answer all the emails and read all the contracts and pay all the bills. And so my role is largely kind of just to make sure that Concerned Ape is free just to focus on game development, and he doesn't have to worry too much about all of the stuff that comes along with like running the business side of things. But he still drives the ship. I meet with him once a week and kind of say, hey, here's all of the things that kind of came through. Are you interested in any of these things? And so we have a pretty, tight working relationship. But then he can just like do the magic thing where he goes and works on the game or thinks about his next project, and I can worry about all the kind of the less exciting things.
Well, what is, if you can talk about anything, is there anything coming next? What are you working on next? I'd just love to hear what's coming next for you.
So probably the big one that I think is on the horizon for me is I want to bring GUBS back into print. So it just went out of print maybe a year or two ago, maybe a little bit longer than that. And so I have somebody working on brand new artwork. There's potentially an expansion that I'm excited about, and just want to bring that back and say, hey, like an anniversary edition or some kind of new version to make that game available.
That's great. Okay, so you're thinking about an anniversary edition of GUBS. When do you think people might be able to get that into their hands?
So it's still being developed or artistically finished up and being made ready for print, but I'm hoping that will launch sometime, I don't know, maybe middle to end of next year. So that's the hope, that GUBS will be back.
Yes, that's great. So if people want to find you online or reach out to you and say, hey, if you're open to that, where might they find you?
Let's see. In general, I do have a Twitter account, the GUBS guy. But if they Google me, I have a website, and they can contact me through that contact page. And I'm happy to get or answer any emails about game making or any of the games that I've worked on. So I love talking to people about it.
That's fantastic. Well, Cole, thanks so much for being here. This was such a wonderful chat, and really great for me to kind of dig into your world a little bit. That's a little unknown to me. So thank you for that.
Thanks for having me.